Hello and welcome. My name is Margie Esteville and I'm a faculty support and development coach. I'll be the host of this session titled Stepping on Toes, Developing a Strong and Enjoyable Chair-Committee Relationship. Microphones will be muted for this presentation, but I encourage you to post questions and comments in the chat. Also, keep your eye on the chat for a session feedback survey link. Now, I'm pleased to introduce you to Dr. Todd Fiore and Dr. Heather Frederick, both current doctoral research faculty members at Ashford University.
Thank you, Margie.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. And if you haven't met me before, there's a couple of fun tidbits about myself on this slide. What I think is most important is that after having done this for 20 years, and written my dissertation over 20 years ago, there are certainly parts of that process that feel like they just happened yesterday. And a lot of those weren't that much fun. And so I'm so excited to be here today with Dr. Fiore, where we talk about ways we can make this experience more enjoyable, not only for you and your colleagues, but your students. Next slide, Todd.
Absolutely. And I'll echo what Dr. Frederick was saying, in that, we all finished our dissertations and thought the world would change and it would just be boom, it'd be good. And then we get to a point where we're able to help students and it brings us right back to that point, or it does for me anyway. A little bit about me on the slide here, but I really am focused in what I do and working with doctoral students. I love working with dissertation students, and that's kind of led into this presentation that Dr. Frederick and I put together. So what we're going to talk about is the relationship between the chair and the committee. And when we talk about committee, it really has two meanings. One is the dissertation committee, or the applied doctoral project planning committee, which is the chair, the methodologist, the committee member, could be several different people, methodological reader. So that's the dissertation committee, but then there's generally a committee member that also is identified as the committee. But in general, when we're talking about what the committee does, we're talking about the group and what purpose they serve for the students. And researchers have found that the faculty advisors that dissertation students have an enormous amount of influence on those students. Students look up to these faculty as almost godlike in terms of looking for feedback and looking for information, because it's something they've never done before. Independent research study is unique, and you need the guidance of experienced faculty that have done it. Faculty advisors will model their skills, share their expertise, help the students become more self-directed, because a lot of times dissertation students, by the time they reach the point they're doing their project, they're experts at being students. They can handle the discussion questions and the paper writing every week, but they really need to transition into that, self-directed mode. And the committee can certainly help them do that. And a lot of it is building confidence and cheerleading along the way too. So these are kind of different things the committee does. And if it's all working well, everybody's playing well together in the sandbox. You've got the student and the committee members all doing, fulfilling their roles. But a lot of times the elephant in the sandbox, so to speak, is that the committee itself doesn't know how to play well together. And there can be dissension among the chair and the committee member, or the methodologist and the chair. So we wanted to come up with a presentation to talk about ways to help facilitate a better relationship between committee members.
So let's start with talking about why the elephant. Why might the elephant exist? And on this slide, we've listed some things that, based on our experience, we think are pretty important to talk about, right? Sometimes it's very simple, like a misunderstanding of roles. Who's doing what exactly and when? Ego is a big one. Being resistant to the feedback of your colleagues. We're going to spend more time on this one in the next slide. Chairs being unfamiliar with the research process. Look, it may be a different process from one university to the next. And sometimes trying to keep track of what happens when and how does it happen can create hiccups. Another one is committee members not being included or choosing not to include themselves as part of the process. And then these next two, the fact that we're all bringing in our experience with different processes and multiple perspectives. All right, look, guys, we know you get a bunch of academics around the table, and we're all going to have different opinions about these things, especially related to how to do a dissertation or a doctoral project. And here's the catch. We might all actually be correct, right? So how do you navigate that? But probably the number one reason you might feel like there's an elephant in your sandbox is because how we should do this, how we can do this successfully, was never modeled to us. And there's not a lot of training that goes on in terms of building the relationship and working together as the committee, right? You learn this is what the university wants in different parts of the document, and this is the process that you follow. But we usually don't spend a lot of time talking about exactly what we're talking about right now. So when you put all these things together, you might have this sense of whether you're a chair or a committee member, you're afraid to step on someone's toes. So let's talk about how to remove that sense and create some fun playtime amongst ourselves here when we're talking about dissertations and doctoral projects. So Todd and I reduced it to 3 core elements. What we are here to argue today is, hey, if we bring humility, a service mentality, and an understanding of what's at stake to the table, we can totally eliminate this awkwardness that sometimes happens. All right, so humility. We know that no one knows everything, right? What if we just supported each other's weakness? Is if we came to this table and said, we understand no doctoral capstone project has ever been mentored by just one faculty member, right? It truly takes a village. And there was this sense of actually embracing and being excited about the other people who are going to be reading this document and giving you critical feedback to make it the best document it can be, right? So this sense of just acknowledging that sometimes you might have to put your ego to the side and listen. I have been doing this for 20 years and I could tell you story after story after story where I thought I had a perfect document with my student and we sent it off to the committee and I open it up for the feedback. And my reaction is could be anywhere from sheer horror to embarrassment. How could I have possibly missed this, right? But what I think happens is, especially as a chair, you're on the phone with the student, you are reading 997 drafts before it's going out to others for review, and you start to almost lose sight of the forest through the trees, right? You know exactly what the student wants to do. You know why it's important. You know how they're going to pull it off, but it may not be articulated in quite the elegant way you think it is when it goes off to the committee. So humility, just taking a nice deep breath and being okay with, you don't have to know everything. That's why we do this as a team. All right, service mentality. What do we mean by this? I'm going to tell you right now, I have never met a faculty member who has done this job for pay, right? Someone did it for us. We're doing it for others. But really, when you serve either as a chair or a committee member, it is this beautiful opportunity for true mentorship. To have this, like Todd was saying, you are the educator, you are the expert, you are the guide, you're the cheerleader, right? You truly are a mentor. And it is one way to have what I call one of the most profound experiences an educator can have, is journeying with someone through their doctoral capstone. And then finally, what if we all agreed, hey, let's just understand what's at stake here. Whether they're writing a dissertation or a doctoral project, this is a demonstration, right? We did our projects, our students are doing theirs to demonstrate to the academy that they have requisite skills that are commensurate with the degree we want to award, right? So what does this mean? It means this is high stakes for the student, but it might be lower stakes for specifics related to the study. So if you've got a group of people working together on the committee and one is suggesting, hey, why don't we make this a multiple case study that spans across states or something like that? Might it add to the richness of the study? Sure, but let's kind of dial it back and as a committee agree, What would be a reasonable, feasible project for this student to do? Todd, next slide. All right, so quick recap. The fundamental requirements that we came up with in order to have fun in the sandbox is this element of humility, service mentality, and an understanding of what's at stake. And if we all think, yeah, hey, this sounds pretty good, then it's just simply not possible to step on toes because you've created an environment of inclusion and collaboration. Next slide, Todd. Okay, so you might be thinking, oh, great, Heather and Todd, theoretically, that sounds great. So what does this look like in practice? Well, our first tip is to recommend that the chair and the committee member establish how they want this relationship to work up front and understand it can look very different across different students with different projects. I know Todd and I had a student where we were interacting together in the classroom with that student. I've got other students where the committee members don't come into the classroom. And this is by design, and this is based on us talking about what are our preferences? How do we want to work together on this project? Who's bringing what to the table? If I'm a committee member for a project where the chair is much more comfortable with qualitative and the student is doing a logistic regression, I might be way more involved on that committee and in the classroom, right? Again, up front, getting together, either maybe email, phone call, Zoom call, and saying, how would you like this to work? What are your expectations? Next slide, Todd. But always remembering it's the chair that drives the process, right? So you've probably heard the saying, you can have too many cooks in the kitchen, and that can certainly happen at this stage of a student's journey. So remembering that the chair drives the process, the chair has the responsibility, right? To maybe invite the committee member to post an introduction announcement in the classroom. Hey, I'd love for the student to know who you are. Would you like to post an announcement? To manage the workflow, to have conversations about, hey, do you want to not see this document until I think it's ready for your review? And how would you most like to get it? Email? Would you like me to put something in the classroom? This is an important one. Managing student expectations about revisions. This is what I do. I say to my student, all right, we think this is pretty good, but guess what happens next? We get to send it out and we are going to be getting critical, substantial feedback as to how we can turn up the dial on this and make it even better. Okay, so I want to be really clear. You may feel like this is the 100th draft, but it's not the final one, right? Consulting with the committee member about progression. I know I love it when someone reaches out to me if I'm a committee member and they say, hey, Heather, you know, student so-and-so, we should have the proposal ready. I'm planning on getting it to you in the next week. These are large documents, right? So I appreciate knowing when one's coming so I can manage my activities. We think this is probably the most important one on this list, and that is to review and negotiate committee feedback prior to giving it to the student, right? So please, it's not a good practice to ask a committee member for their feedback, get it, and then just forward it to the student. But to actually open up that document, go through, because it can happen. We just talked about it with multiple perspectives, that this committee member could be giving feedback and asking for revisions to the student that you've asked them specifically not to do, right? So at that point, that's where the chair again takes the responsibility to negotiate with the committee member. Hey, what are we talking about here? What really are you asking for in this revision? And let me tell you why we didn't go that route. And then, of course, ensuring all communication and feedback is documented in the classroom as it relates to the student. That's our archive, right, of everything that's happened. And when we say final approval is a rubber stamp, what we want you to think about there is interacting with the committee before it goes to DSIM and having the document that goes into DSIM be something that you and the committee member both already agree you think is pretty close to meeting the university's criteria. Next slide, Todd.
So, you know, what can the what can be done so that you continue to play in the sandbox well. And Dr. Frederick talked about a lot of specifics from the perspective of the chair and how the chair can manage the process. But the committee member needs to fulfill their role also. Number one, they need to give a hoot. And what we mean by that is it is easy sometimes as a committee member to let the chair just drive the whole process and not interject yourself. Only wait till you're asked for feedback and then just kind of divorce yourself from the process and leave it up to the chair. The student doesn't see it that way. They see it as their committee is there to help them. And if you have a member of the committee that's not interacting or not part of the process, it looks like they don't give a hoot. It looks like they don't care as much. And that may not be the case, but that's not the impression you want to give. So committee members need to make sure that they're establishing up front their intention to contribute. Committee members also should read documents and provide feedback in a timely fashion. Different schools have different guidelines for how long feedback can take. And I know that often we're very busy and there's different things to do, but you don't want to leave it as a mystery as to when your feedback is coming back. In the same way, you want the chair to communicate with you, when to expect to be asked to give feedback. You also want to be able to communicate back, all right, I should be able to get this back to you by the weekend or at the end of by Monday or Tuesday, so that all parties know what to expect. And that just goes back to the communication that we needed to. And then if necessary, you have to be willing to step on toes, but respectfully and with kindness. There are situations where a committee member might understand the process a little more clearly than the chair does, or might be more familiar with a particular methodology as it's practiced at a particular institution. So you have to be willing to reach out to the chair. This happens just kind of behind closed doors, but reach out to the chair and say, hey, have you thought about this? I'm not stepping on your toes here. Well, actually, I am a little bit, but I just want to be able to say, have you thought about this? I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't bring this up to say, the process usually goes like this. And just be willing to have those conversations. Too often we see situations where there's not that type of communication between committee members and resentments build up over time. And it becomes a situation of, well, that person just doesn't know. Well, if they don't know and you didn't tell them, it's really not fair to be critical of how they're handling things. So in summary, be willing to step on toes and be willing to have your toes stepped on. After all, it's about the student's feet and not our feet, so to speak. Basically, it's really about communicating, allowing for respectful and professional disagreements, but really understanding that you're serving the students' needs and that it takes a village to complete this. So we appreciate your time and would welcome any questions you might have.
Hi, this is Stephanie Hoffman. And I just wanted to say hello. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Oh, okay, good. Okay, so I've been a committee member on many, many, many committees, and they're all different because the chair directs the committee very differently. But I do want to point out one thing that has continually upset me, and that's when a student sends me a draft and there's no chair backing them up to say the chair wants me to read it. It's the student sort of directing the business and not the chair. And then I don't know if my feedback, I send it back, I say, please share with your chair. I don't know if that's actually happening or not.
That's a great point to bring up because it's not unique, and that goes back to what we were saying about the chair has to dictate the process. If you receive a draft from a student, reach out to the chair and say, hey, did you want me to review this draft? Because I didn't, I wanted you to see it before it went back to the student. One of the things that can be very confusing for students is that, like we talked about, they can get multiple perspectives from multiple committee members and they can all be correct and they don't know which to follow. Dr. Frederick, what would you like to add to that?
Yeah.
My suggestion would be definitely reach out to the chair.
I agree with you, Todd. Stephanie, I don't take anything directly from a student, but I don't do that. And I know that's part of my protocol because I always have a communication with the chair and say, hey, let's talk about how this is going to happen. And there's so many reasons for it not to come directly from the student that usually, well, in every case, we've agreed, yes, the document will come from me. And so in those cases, I do, as quickly as I see the email, so the student's not waiting around. I thank them for reaching out to me and that I'm excited to give them feedback, but that I have spoken to their chair and we have set up the parameters and we have done this for their best interest because you can't have too many cooks in the kitchen. And so chair so-and-so will be sending this to me for my review when they believe it's ready, right? And then I always email the chair and say, hey, just wanted to let you know, or I'll actually CC them on it so that, again, transparency, communication is key. Can't underestimate the importance of just communicating.
Yeah, and Stephanie, go ahead.
Was that helpful, Stephanie?
Oh, yes. Thank you. That's really good ideas. I wish I had not given in to the students' demands and I wish I had, contacted the chair.
Well, and let's be honest, sometimes students will try to play, good cop, bad cop, mommy and daddy, trying to get, feedback from one so they can get it approved the way they want to get it approved. I mean, that may not be their intention, but that it can end up being the result. And that's not what we want. We want to make sure everybody's on the same team. And you brought up another point about how different chairs have different styles, which is yet again another important reason why that conversation happens up front between the chair and the committee members. How do you want to, handle this? And that's where, as a committee member, you have to be willing to step on their toes a little bit. If they say, oh, just give feedback whenever the student sends it to you, be willing to say, I'm not comfortable with that kind of process. Could we do it through you? Something like that.
Yeah, and this is like a bonus tip. I have a special notebook of all the students that I chair a committee, and I'm old school because I like to turn the pages and I like to use highlighters, but you could certainly develop this on an Excel spreadsheet. That way I know what time zones people are in. So if a chair says, hey, will you be available at noon? I know what time they're talking about and things like that. And it just helps me keep things organized.
Oh, that sounds great. Thank you. I'll see if anybody else has a question, but I have one more.
I think go ahead. You may be our strongest participant right now.
Okay. Have you ever as a chair, had to fire a committee member?
I've had conversations with lead faculty or deans about that. I don't really consider it's my right necessarily to fire a committee member. It's really the students and the institutions, right? But certainly if there's an issue, I want to discuss that with someone higher up the chain, so to speak.
Yeah, it can get so tricky and it can get so awful, as you pointed out. It can just be the worst experience ever.
It can, but it also can be the best if you make it that way. But you're right, and unfortunately, who really suffers when you get into those negative experiences is the student. And I have an ethical problem with anything that slows the student down. And if it is internal bickering between faculty, that's not acceptable to me personally.
Yeah, Stephanie, and Jen is posting in the chat box to take it to the course lead. I definitely think if you've had the conversation, I definitely think getting someone else involved, again, with the end result saying, what here is in the best interest of the student? I personally have never asked a committee member to leave. I've had conversations where I've said, hey, it doesn't look like could I get some more interaction, more feedback from you. Like I'll send a document and the document might come back that says it looks great. And I'm like, I've been doing this long enough to know that if you actually read the document, you could probably find something, right? But honestly, sometimes those committee members maybe know me or have worked with me before and think of me as competent and capable and don't feel like, kind of like what Todd was saying, like maybe they don't feel comfortable saying, yeah, I think this part could actually be tweaked. So I've had those conversations. I can tell you personally, I've asked to be removed from committees, not at this university. I want to be clear. I love all you guys are awesome. These are like, I've never had so much fun building sandcastles as I've had with you guys here, but I have asked and said, hey, listen, I spent 4 hours, reading this manuscript and providing in-depth edits. And then it came back and I didn't see any of them being, so if my feedback isn't helpful, then I would like to take it to a different committee, right? So I think having the communication again, and then getting someone higher up involved to explain the situation, always focusing on what's in the best interest of the student and getting them a high quality demonstration project in a reasonable amount of time.
That sounds good. Thank you.
I had one question for you guys from the faculty support perspective. So over time, I've seen my share of interpersonal awkwardness and so forth on committees that could have very well been avoided if there had been a preliminary meeting of when the student first presented their LOI or PJT. And I was wondering if you, Todd, or Heather, or any of you folks have seen universities where that step is formalized as perhaps a requirement or a soft requirement, a strong suggestion to when a chair gets a new student to then meet formally without the student with their committee members. Do you see that happening?
I've never seen that.
Me neither.
I haven't seen it, but I think that would be something worth considering.
Does it sound micromanaging or heavy-handed?
The word micromanage to me, people that don't like to be micromanaged probably just don't like to be managed in general. But if you're going to take the institution's money to do the job, you've got to follow whatever requirements they may set up. And I don't think a 15 to 30 minute meeting is too much to ask, but that's me.
And you know what, Todd, I don't disagree with you. I think if the expectation was set forth that as a chair, you'll reach out to the committee member, right? And often, I'll be honest, I would say in 95% of my cases, these are a couple email exchanges. Hey, let me tell you a little bit about me. I'm quant, I'm really not qual. This is where the student is in their project. Do you want to see the PJT, or would you be happy to just see the you know what I mean? Would this be better? Would you rather have this conversation on a phone call? Happy to give you a ring. And usually either a couple emails back and forth and we're all good. But the expectation could certainly be, as part of the chair's responsibility, to, hey, establish a relationship with the committee member that really doesn't have to take very long. It really doesn't. It's not a big ask.
Thank you.
Hi, if I could make a comment to this very interesting exchange. This is Gloria Zúñiga y Postigo, and I'm glad that Margie brought up this very great suggestion, because I've been in situations in which the first time I've even heard that there was a student I needed to review something for was when I got a notification from DSEM, even in courses to which I haven't been added yet. And so that puts, the support people in a very difficult situation. Mm-hmm. And the chair is just not even reaching out. I haven't been in, that many committees, but I would say in 95% of the cases, I never hear from the chair. And since we have a certain amount of time to review material, it's always nice if, there's some kind of coordination. There's a first, chapter coming up or something like this, because everybody is very busy. But this hasn't happened. And I think part of the problem is because the expectations are not clear. So, but I think that Margie's idea should be part of, because right now they are revising the expectations for chairs. I think that that's a great suggestion, Margie, for, there to be an initial connection between the chair. It doesn't have to even be a meeting, at least for there to be a reaching out, like Heather mentioned. These are my strengths. I don't do that. How can I help you? How can we both work together on this? I think that that's great. I just wanted to chime in and say that's really great, because sometimes it's very, very difficult to be a committee member if you feel like the third wheel.
Absolutely. I think I concur with what you're saying, but I think it is also the theme of this presentation that even if that's an expectation, we can't guarantee that's going to happen. So if as a committee member, you're feeling left out of the process, put yourself into the process. Reach out to that chair.
Or reach out to me, and I'll reach out to the
or
chair.
Marjorie. But Gloria, I loved, that you brought this up, because honestly, in some universities, the expectation is that the committee member is being paid so little that the chair has this idea that I better not be calling on that committee member. And Jen, to your point about like, sometimes it feels like you're taking a back seat as a committee member. Some of the chairs you're working with may come from a culture where, hey, you're only drawing on that committee member when you really, really need them. Right. And so that's why I think having this communication up front and saying, hey, how do you want this to look? Or here's how I usually do things as a chair or as a committee member. If you don't hear from the chair, you can say, hey, as a committee member, this is what I would love to, contribute to this project. Let me know how that sounds. Right.